Okay, as usual for those early birds, you'll hear some silence as we just give some time for us to build up a quorum in the room. Okay, for those who have already joined, a little ask. I wish I'd done this for all of the talks I've shared today. Just make an ask for everybody who came to this session with a question already. Stick it in there. I always have this theory that there is no bad question if it's asked early enough, no stupid question if it's asked early enough. I'm sure with a talk which is bound with the title, How to Start a Revolution, I'm sure some people already have some questions, so feel free to just ask questions as we go along. We want to make this as conversational as possible. We do have 3 quite different talks in terms of, 2 are similar in their domain, different in terms of approach. However, I think there's a strong commonality around the 3. And it'd be really interesting just to hear how everybody had interpreted just the title of the talk, but then also as we go along, there might be things that you want us to surface and sort of poke through. We will have, after each talk, a 5-minute section for burning questions, and then we'll have a few minutes at the end for everybody just to sort of talk about the 3 talks together, and for the panelists to join us as well. So I've got 3 speakers. First up, welcome David. David is an old hand at Map Camp and an old friend. Spoke at last year's Map Camp on a similar topic, which he's now published as a book. So I want to let you introduce and just plug the book for a moment there, David.
Thank you, Tim, much appreciated. Okay, I'll just fire up my share here. Give me a second. There we go. Okay, I'll assume that's okay. All good. Beautiful. So, my name is Dave Anderson. I'm a technical fellow with Bizarre Voice. I'm located here in Belfast. And I think it's a great topic, how to create a revolution. So let's get into it. And as Damien so kindly mentioned, I want to tell the story of how I came about publishing this book, which is out from IT Revolution, called The Value Flywheel Effect. It's coming out at the end of November. So we often use maps to tell a story. So I thought maybe I should tell a story with maps, just kind of switch it on its head slightly. We'll see how this goes. So one of the things that over the last maybe 10 years, myself and some of my colleagues, my co-authors in the book, Mark McCann and Michael Riley, we've been using maps to effectively create a revolution within the company. And one of the big kind of maps that was super impactful, and this is really a story of maps that were very impactful to us and how we drove change in a big organization. And Simon created this map, and this is just stolen from the book, and I've recreated it with permission. This idea of below the line, I always loved this map, and this was so impactful for us. The fact that to win the battle, lose the war. This idea of there's all these things below the line that should be just taken care of, and above the line there are things like serverless first, etc., that are really important. So your cloud strategy is above the line, and all your kind of architecture and traditional are below the line. This was such a fundamental lesson for us, and I'm not going to talk through each of these maps in detail, just to impact the map had on us as we created the story in the book. And anytime we drew this type of map, Mark McCann would usually come in, draw a big line through the map, and say, it doesn't matter. You would draw a big red line, say everything below this line doesn't matter. So actually figuring out as a company what you need to worry about, the stuff at the top, versus what you don't need to worry about, and where you create that shared responsibility was so important. So this was a it's not really a map, but it's actually structured like a map. One of the things mapping taught us as a team, as technical leaders, was always start with the user need. Always start, who's the customer and what's the need? And even as we started doing mind maps, we still started drawing almost like a map. We start with the why, what we wanted to do, and what were the underlying things that were the underlying needs that we needed to figure out. We drew so many things like this over the last probably 10 years. And one of the things that this kind of, this idea of starting with the need helped us do was really join the dots. This was another map that I thought was always really important. This idea of thinking of the business owner, be it the president, a CEO, a board member, saying what do they care about from their IT. And we'd be talking about, like Lambda, machine learning, whatever else. And it was always more speed and cost. I don't care how you do it. So we often would draw a map out and figure out the needs right down from speed and cost. And you think like your agile program, how you handle cost, how you handle engineering, and right, your cloud capability was always right down at the bottom and spot those inertia points. So using a really simple map to join the dots was always super impactful. The next thing I thought was super interesting was the idea of making mapping accessible for engineers. As we started the map, we get very like everyone, like it's very complicated. We'd lose ourselves. We'd figure out the terminology. We come up with this really nice system of mapping with teams, and these are mostly teams that had not heard of worldly mapping or were not experts. So we devised this way of doing a grid where we'd have the 4 evolutionary states along the bottom. Genesis, custom, product, commodity, numbered as 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'd have visible, invisible, lettered as A, B, C, and D. This was an early map, so you'll probably see the letters are the wrong way around. And what that gave us a way to do quickly as we spoke is we'd maybe put components or products or applications in a particular area. We'd say, okay, that's a A2 or an A3, that's good. And then as you get down to like a D2, it's like, why are we doing that? So this gave us a really brilliant mechanism to map out things and almost have a grid reference. And we almost started to talk about almost in shorthand, yeah, that's C2 or D2, that's low level, invisible, custom build. We need to get rid of that or move it over to the right. So this became a really valuable way of talking about where things were in the value chain with teams. Another thing that was really useful as we took the engineer as almost like a persona, we would map out the things that the engineer had to do. And this is always brilliant for trying to identify the tipping point. Where's the change that we need to move? Like anytime we drew these maps, and this was like a tidy map, there would be like maybe 30, 40 components, like really complicated. What that helped us see was always 1 or 2 things here that were super important. Like for example, in this map, Adora, like basically your DevOps throughput scores. That's where we'd say, well, that's something we need to move. So we identify key components we need to move. So that idea of mapping out the landscape from the engineer's perspective and figuring out which is the lever we need to work on. So that was extremely impactful as we kind of mapped out that sort of impact. So as we tried to, change the engineering and the cloud abilities in the company. And this was, I love this map. I think this was back in 2015. Myself, Mark, Mike, and a few others, we were sitting kind of thinking about the future of the company, and you can't read it, and that's probably intentional. We actually mapped out all the things we needed to do from a persona, and the persona we put here was a team that affects customer outcomes by delivery. That was our kind of persona, and we mapped out all the different things we could do from that. And what we eventually did was we used this to create a kind of our service first approach. So I thought I kept this on the wall where I sat for about 3 or 4 years. We'd always go back to it and say, hang on a second, where is that? We even started to use this to talk about things like outsourcing versus off the shelf versus build, that kind of rent, reuse, or buy, build cycle. So we used this kind of map as a really early map to try and make sense of what we needed to do. Because often when you're trying to create that revolution, there's so many things you need to do. You need a way to sense make and decide what to go after first. And this is brilliant as giving us visibility, but also helping our decision making, that we need to maybe start down here and work our way up. So this was such a powerful and impactful map. And then finally, the book itself, we had this concept called creating space for innovation. And obviously going completely meta, we mapped a book about mapping. So one of the things that we do with the value flywheel effect is we actually look, if you're the CEO of a company, where's your clarity of purpose? Where's your long-term value? What's your next best action? And that all sits on the idea of challenge. And the whole idea of these kind of what I would call customer needs is you want to shift these to the right to create space for innovation. So this is probably like a tidied up version of this map that we tried to get right for probably about 2 years, trying to draw this map correctly. And this really has become the value flywheel effect. It just took us a while to try and identify what this was. So here, this is the value flywheel that I talk about in the book, which was, it's our way that we've tried to create sort of impact and change in the company. And it's really quite simple, nice and iterative, a way to join business technology strategies. So first of all, think about your clarity of purpose. That should be at the top of your map. What's your North Star? Then create the right environment, which is your psychological safety and that environment for success. That, funny enough, is right at the bottom of the map. Next best action, make sure engineers are well skilled and have a good cloud strategy. That's probably on the left, moving to the right. And then eventually long-term value, be very clear about good architecture standards. That's on the right. It's a best practice, use a best practice. And we found that applying this kind of flywheel to a company is a great way to kind of drive change and create movement without having a sort of a big bang approach. And I know this is quite close to Tope's talk next, so it's probably a nice kind of join. Short and sweet, that's me. So here's the book itself. It's called The Value Flywheel Effect. And really we talk about, the big thing for me is a lot of companies have already moved to the cloud, but they're not finding the value that they need. So this idea of the value flywheel effect is a way of trying to use mapping to find that value. I hope that was interesting. It's really just a story of how we've used several key maps over the past 10 years to come from just writing a bunch of stuff on the wall and make sense of it, to gradually evolving that through to what I hope is a published book and will help some of you learn how to map and how to drive change. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, if you could do me a favor and just start again and go through it all again, because I'm still writing my first question. A lot follow. It's brilliant. No, I'm joking. Could you go back a slide? I've got a burning question on this because
Sure.
It's one that I have the pain of every day. This bit here where you talk about the challenge, creating space, I think you call it creating space for change, psychological safety and environment for success. How easy did you find it to articulate and then to sell that? Because that's often the piece where, okay, that's cool, we'll buy some beanbags and then we'll do all the rest of the stuff.
Absolutely. Like I thought long and hard about that phrase because an awful lot of my peers, ideally in the US, would say to me, challenge doesn't mean what you think it means. It's what, and really I would say challenge with good intent. And the nice thing, and I know Simon talks about this a lot, is when you create a presentation and you criticize a presentation, you're criticizing the person who's presenting. But when you map as a team, you're challenging the map. So that kind of safety around, having a strategy map written up on a whiteboard, people can say, why is that there? And that's a fairly safe question. So that whole idea of having maps in the open and encouraging people to ask questions about them I found it massive for that environment of success, as opposed to being a presentation that's presented to the executive team behind closed doors.
Really interesting. And how about building in things like waste and time, right? So if you have a very, very, very well run DevOps team, for example, you'll be pushing out lots and lots and lots of tickets, and you'll have a benchmark of this is what a productive developer or admin should be doing. If you're to create the room for, say, experimentation, you need to probably lower that bar. Is that something you found you had to do? And same question, how easy was it to get people to understand that?
I think the clarity of purpose is really important here. You could fall into the technical side, but I would say almost the business side, the clarity of purpose. That needs to be crystal clear. There's no point having a really well-oiled DevOps team if the business are not happy with their high-level goals. So that ability to link what infrastructure is doing with that high-level kind of business goal is, for me, that's the secret sauce. Is throughput or maybe performance or stability more important? So that's, for me, it all starts with that North Star and clarity of purpose and making sure that those DevOps teams understand that. I think a danger here is that DevOps team become too distracted from the core business.
Fantastic. Are you giving freebies of the book to friends, or do I have to pay for it?
Freebies for friends, yes. No, I'll definitely get you a copy. So
I'll be very happy to pay for that and to buy it for others. Manish, I saw you giggling, smirking towards the end of that. I'm wondering whether that was in agreement or any thoughts, Tope and Manish?
I was fascinated with the challenge, because in some cultures, challenge is perceived very differently, as in, somebody questioning the authority. And so I think that's the start of a revolution would be to really define what a healthy challenge process is. And so um, words are good, like we talk about psychological safety, but in practice, how we are doing it is what matters.
mm,
And actually,
yes,
that's why I love the phrase psychological safety without, it's kind of like a principle rather than prescriptive direction, because it means different things in different cultures, right? Some is like the ability to let people speak. Some is the ability to like challenge and feel safe to challenge openly. Some is the ability to kind of be vulnerable. And honestly, David, this book, it feels like it's like, I feel like I did this book without even knowing that I did the steps in the book. I was like making all of my notes in the background, like on my phone, like, okay, taking my pictures, because this very nicely like tees into what I want to talk about in Craft Heinz. And I think if anything, like it proves that your book is actually practically executionable, because a lot of these principles we actually applied when it came to kind of looking at how we want to call it, but like this new virtual workspace at Craft Heinz.
yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. We've been talking about this for a long time. For me, there is that, and it's that experimentation, test and learn, iteration, that approach. Like these are not big bang project plans of yesteryear. You start moving. And one of the things that we found, and I thought Manish's comment was great as well, is you start to identify inertia or lack of momentum. What is slowing down that flywheel? What, like, where are the sticking points? And that's the things that you need to sit and look at. And often it's maybe it's a lack of psychological safety. Maybe it's politics slow things down. Maybe it's lack of platform. Maybe it's an incoherent or unclear North Star. There's lots of things that would slow down that cycle. But as you well know, once that flywheel starts turning, you start making real progress.
Yeah, love it.
David, I could talk to you about this for hours. I want to quickly move on to Tope's talk. We do have some time for more question and answers at the end, but just to make sure we get all the talks through. Tope, welcome again and thank you. You're talking to us from Chicago.
That's right, that is right.
Yeah, thanks for joining us at this time in your day and for just sort of accommodating the very EMEA-centric timing of
No problem. I don't sleep. Basically, I wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. Chicago time, and I have like my European morning and then my American afternoon and then my Australian evening. So I am used to it, and I definitely was not going to miss this.
Sounds unsustainable. Now, you're going to be talking to us about a revolution in work, right? So we've all been through an experience. We have this term now, return to work. So you're going to be talking to us about that, a subject that is very close to my heart, probably everybody's. But I suppose we've seen the difference in, narrative from pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and then now when perhaps we've got economic pressures, perhaps the argument or the discussion isn't happening quite the same way. So lots to ask you about. Go ahead.
Yeah, my pleasure. And actually, first of all, let's address the phrase return to office, because I've been saying since the beginning, look, the office is different. It's literally just return to previous, in the US, we call it zip code, in the UK, postcode, return to known postcode, because even our homes that we've spent all of our time in have changed. And actually, David, I loved how you started your presentation talking about being a human-centric approach, because that was the drive for me and my team was actually, you know what, forget about the technology. I'm not a technologist. I work within technology, but that's not my background. Mine is like, I've been in so many different spaces that really actually I care about like the person. I really love the designer's mentality, like applied design thinking. And actually, as we moved our employees from being like mainly office based to this originally at the beginning of the pandemic being home-based, and then eventually like this idea of like a flexible location. You know, as most companies were, Kraft Heinz, we were predominantly using Skype, and we had to switch immediately to Teams. And now that's a technological transformation, let's just say, but really the way we started was with ethnographical research. So David, you said like human-centered approach. For me, I'm like, that's ethnographical research. You go in, you understand who it is you are trying to solve for. It really is that first stage of design thinking around like understand and observe. And what I love about ethnographical research is that it's not like quantitative in the sense of asking surveys. I mean, there is an element of that. It's not qualitative in just like focus groups, but really you watch what people do and what they don't do. In fact, it's like being a good doctor. In some stages, I would say it's like being a corporate doctor, because you know, patient walks into your office, patient might say, doctor, my knee hurts. You say, okay, like a good doctor. Okay, right, it hurts. And the patient might even say, doctor, you have to operate. In fact, you have to operate like today, it hurts so much. And as any good doctor does, you'd say, okay, look, how long has it been hurting? Actually, where does it hurt? You know, can you do maybe 3 steps for me? And you listen to the language the patient uses and the language the patient doesn't use. You listen to how they define like success in their life. You listen to how they define pain. And actually you might say, you know, you think it's your knee, but really it's the placement of your foot. And if we correct the placement of your foot through physio, we do not have to operate or amputate. We don't even have to medicate. It's just physical therapy. And that's really what I love about this ethnographical approach, which is let's make sure we're even asking the right problem. You know, rather than say, I need a new alarm clock, we can say, like, let's think of a new way to wake people up in the morning. And that's what we did. Like, let's think about a new way to connect people in the business. Like, what is work? And we went to actually, I started off with our CEO. I went to his direct reports and kind of went down and down, and I went to different functions and I said, like, how do you define success? What does success look like? How do you guys work? What are your rituals and routines? Are you monthly teams, weekly teams, annual teams? Are you project-based teams? I was really trying to understand, like, what is the rhetoric? What is the language? And actually, what's like the hook? What's the selling point? What's the commonality? Because a technology like Microsoft Teams, and look, I'm saying Microsoft Teams in this case, it could be Skype, it could be Slack, it could be, there's a plethora, Facebook Workspace, there's a plethora of solutions, but like a technological solution is a solution, but really at the application, you need to understand who your family is. Like, what are they actually trying to solve? What is the common language that you can hear throughout like all of these different instances or interactions with people? And what we identified was that actually people wanted like a corporate brain. People are afraid, you know, if you're not physically next to one another and you share information that way through osmosis, well, how do you like share, store, and organize information in an intuitive way that doesn't necessarily require it? Like, it's what I love about behavioral science, right? It's like, it's frictionless, it's in flow, and it's just intuitive, it's easy. So one was around like, how do we share information? Like, what is our corporate brain? How do we connect with one another? Because actually, as a company, we work in a very matrix style, actually in a very agile fashion, where we have traditional functions. So we have like finance, sales, marketing, but people come together around like projects and around business objectives. And that might be something like, you know, I led our return to office from a tech point of view. It might be something like return to office. It might also be like a renovation of a physical space. It might be a business problem. So for example, we want to rethink a business process, but really my function is technology, but we tend to organize ourselves around these tribes and squads. And then how do we like enable free flow of communication? And that was really like our hook. In fact, it was great because then we were not talking about the tech. In fact, the language was tech agnostic. We were showing people how they could be effective in this new modern way, in a way that you separate business objective from location. So it's really like this idea of like a virtual workspace, or I'm going to call it virtual, but a non-static workspace, but you could really get work done in a technologically agnostic way. You could connect with anybody, regardless of where they were based in any geographical location. And you had the ability to kind of like spin in and spin out of these different teams without like losing any like tribal knowledge. That was a really, really big concern. Like, you don't lose knowledge. You don't even have to think about it. It just exists in these structures that are out there. And then David, if I go back to your idea of like psychological safety, I love that. It sounds like a very fancy term, but for me, it's like giving people the ability to realize that you're attacking a problem, and we're all attacking the problem and not the person. David, you're right. Like, if you attack someone's presentation or even their let's say their assimilation, it is very personal. You know, I listened to this podcast and it said, if you don't like someone's book, don't, like, the worst thing you could do is like attack the book. It's like actually very ignorant to even do that, because how many years and how much research has gone in that you're not, you know, how can you just have a summary like in however long it is and say this is a good or a bad book or a good or a bad movie? You need to like respect the process. And that's really what I think about, like, when people come up with ideas. And I really love comedy for that, because, you know, comedy, it's not no, it's yes and, like improv. Like the improv skills, we have somewhere in Chicago called Second City, where I really like love applying those improv skills in the business sector, because actually it gives people that's how I feel psychologically safe. And actually what I would do with my team is, I'm not afraid to say, I don't know, I don't actually understand. Can someone help me understand? In fact, I think probably people would say that's Tope's phrase. Can someone help me understand why? What am I missing? What don't I understand? Oh, actually, do you know what? I'm wrong. I thought I heard this, but actually you guys have helped me realize that it's actually this. And I think there's got to be like humility in leadership as well. And really, that's what I love about mapping, because it helps you to kind of like, David, you were talking about like these commonalities and themes and understanding like where different groups come together. And I really love mapping for like that ability to help you define like goal congruence and understand like where are we aligned and where are we different, and being able to like respect where we're different and also respect where we're very similar. And you end up saying like, this is not mine, this is not yours, this is like ours. And if we want to attack the map, we kind of do that together. And it's not even attacking the map, it's actually, you know, I recognize that something has changed. I sit in one of Simon's research groups, and we meet on a bi-weekly basis, and we talk about a number of different areas. But what I really love about that process is that it's a collaborative effort to bring everything together. And then we stop, we look at it, and we start every session by looking at our map and saying, does this still make sense? And actually, do you know what? We've recognized that this has changed. And I really think there's something so powerful in that ability to kind of build something together. Everybody's brought their own input in, and you never necessarily attack. And in fact, at some point, it's hard to even say who did this, who said that. It's so, it's like the ultimate death of ego. So at least that's how we've applied like the idea and the concepts of mapping, especially when we were designing what this new way of working looks like. And it's really enabled us like work in a very agile way, where we ideate and we iterate as we are kind of like moving forward, running small proof of concepts with different groups, and then allowing what needs to scale, and also allowing what can't scale to remain decentralized. Sometimes when you look at big business, we always think everything has to like one size fits all, but actually sometimes that's not how it works. There's different nuances based on different geographies, different objectives. Maybe something worked for this particular problem, but it won't work for every similar problem because of a different geography, different stakeholders, and like giving people the confidence and space to respect that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Did you finish, and what was the biggest impact?
Yeah. So did we finish Return to Office? No. And I actually don't think we ever will. In fact, it's like the agile journey, right? I actually don't think you ever finish it. I would be ashamed if I ever said, yep, it's done. And like, we have the best workspace and we don't need to, there's nothing else to be done. I mean, obviously there's things that we physically have done. So we physically redesigned some workspaces that has like physically been complete. We actually have like a couple of big collaborative spaces that we're still like working on, but certain like physical things that are done. But really that mindset shift, that paradigm shift in mentality is not done. We're still on that journey. And I think there's always going to be space to grow. Like, I don't think at least for me, I pray to die on my peak. I never want to be on the decline. I always want to feel like there's something more that I could do and something more that I could learn. So probably to answer your first question, no, we haven't finished. And then to answer your second question, what have I learned is that there's so much beauty in this continual development. It's fun. It's fun to kind of look back, take energy from where you've gone, but also look forward and say, actually, there's still space to grow. I've also recognized, David, you mentioned like that's why I said your book is everything we've done. Win the war, but you don't have to win every battle. And there's power in that, like the ability to concede. I used to always think that like this is my idea, and I'm very clear on that, and it has to kind of look exactly how I see it. And I've recognized that actually something, you can start thinking that you know the problem and how it should be solved, and you can end with something totally different. But the thing that's different, everybody's brought their input in, and for the most part, it can be better. So I think I was once taught this phrase of be slow to form your opinion and quick to kind of let go of your beliefs. And I live by that. I live by like the beauty of what that looks like. And I can't tell you that everybody is the same. I can't tell you that I always get it right, but the idea of like never being complete, never knowing everything, never being like an expert, and that journey of learning and discovery is like one of the most exciting things.
Fantastic. Very quickly, David, Manish, any thoughts on what you've heard?
Yeah, just I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I like the idea of strong opinions loosely held. I just have a quick comment on a question, really, or maybe it's just an observation. It's almost like there's a nice concept called socio-technical, which is really it's a very old phrase from like 67 years ago, and it's really about there's two types of organizations. There's function and purpose, and you're describing that purpose. If there's a really clear purpose, then you look at the technology and the people as one big system, and how you kind of identify that purpose and you know really get behind that. Where if you're all by function, people can get lost in their function. So I think and I love the way you brought design in right at the top of that, because if you're very clear in your purpose, then you can use proper design techniques to really get behind it. So my question was going to be, do you think I think design is massively misunderstood. A lot of people think it's like, you know, visual or like a web page. What you're talking about is real design, getting behind a purpose. Yeah. So I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, and actually, do you know, I love the distinction. For me, design is like a mindset, but then you obviously have like your UX and your like you have like your interface, but design is like a mindset, and it's like a sincere mindset that people like apply to all areas of their life, right? Like even what are we going to cook for dinner? Like it's a great way of really making sure you understand what are you trying to solve. Sometimes in big business, you just think problem, solution, and actually solution isn't always the solution to the right problem. And then you have the sunk cost fallacy. When you can invest a bit of time to really make sure that all of your stakeholders are aligned and everybody is behind the vision, but you are able to kind of say this, let's test, let's prototype. If it didn't work, let's go back and make sure we really understood what we're trying to solve and we really understand who our customer is. I agree that it's like a mindset. It's not it in some cases, like your visual may not actually even change. You may not really even see it materialize in that way. It's always super tangible.
I really wish they gave me 2 hours for this session rather than the hour. I did some research in a talk last year at work around who we design for and how, right? So what happens when you change from designing for people like me who already buy the tech, who already, you know, pretty much halfway on the journey. And when you flip that to start designing it for people who aren't even thinking of themselves as consumers. So in this particular context, it was people who are customers of a utility, but who will never, ever log into an email box to look at an email. You know, how do you serve that person in terms of devices, in terms of ambient computing? And it was so interesting.
I was just going to say, to that point, there's a really interesting piece of research. I'm sure people are familiar with it by Geoffrey Moore and Geoffrey Moore's innovation adoption curve, where he says you have these 4 archetypes. You have your enthusiast, you have your early and your late majority, and then you have like your laggards. And then you have like this chasm where people can drop off, and actually recognizing that some people are enthusiastic, some people need like mass movement to move, and some people will not move. But we're able to be all of them at different stages in our life. Like when it comes to tech, and like technology developments and tech and psychology. I love that. I'm enthusiastic, but ask me to make notes and not have, like, I have a diary, which is pen and paper. And I just I like live by my pen and paper diary. And I don't want to change from that phase. I'm actually like a laggard. So the ability to understand, like, what archetype are we serving, and when, and where, like, and what do they need? I really love that idea of, like, who are we designing for?
Yeah, and the results, the impact were quite, this is after like a 2-hour workshop.
Mm-hmm.
We're suddenly looking at things and saying, how come we haven't come up with that? You realize it was all just because of a little bit myopia and a little bit, lack of broad focus. But I must bring us to a close because I have Manish. I told you I had the pleasure of speaking to Manish. We had a 15-minute catch-up that went on for nearly 2 hours yesterday. And that's because Manish started telling me the story and I kept saying, stop, 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 stop. There's no way I didn't know this was happening until he told me when it happened. And I said, I can see why I was distracted. But that little interaction actually does say a lot about what Manish will be telling us about today. So we're moving away from teams in the corporate workplace environment and we're talking about a massive nation. Biggest nation yet? No, soon to be the biggest nation on earth. We're talking about India and farmers in a revolution in it was the second green revolution, I think is what you called it, Manish. So if you wouldn't mind, again, Manish is an old friend of Map Camp in the community. Really, really glad to have you speaking on something so close to your heart, and which many of us simply won't have a view on. So welcome, Manish. Introduce yourself and your talk.
Thank you, everyone. I really am honored to be speaking today. And, if I were to ask a question, what is a revolution, right? I would encourage all the participants, audience to share their definition of it while we, talk about the farmers' revolution. And also, what elements do they think are key to a particular revolution? Or it can be generalist, you can be very specific, but I would encourage the audience to share their thoughts while we go along the story of farmers' revolution in India. For me, revolution is change or act of change in the status quo, um, mostly uh, radical, often radical change that is brought by a group of people who may have common goal but may not have necessarily the common reasons to achieve the goal. And while we talk about this farmers revolution, you will also notice that the farmers had a common goal, but they may not have the same reason to achieve the goal. So with that understanding, I would like to share my screen, and please let me know if you can see the best map of the world. We start with the blank. Silence is the best sound. Yeah, thank you. So, it, okay. So as we map along, feel free to ask questions if you want and intervene. So, it started with, I would say its genesis dates back to February 2016, when the central government in particular, so there are two governments, the government at the center and the government of the states. So the genesis of this revolution dates back to February 2016, when the central government decided to double the farmers' income by 2022. And they unilaterally introduced 3 new farm laws in September 2020. The farmers in India have been struggling to reclaim their identity that they had during the Green Revolution in 1960s, that happened in 1960s, with the slogans such as Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, which translates to Hail the soldier, hail the farmer, from then Prime Minister Mr. Lal Bahadur Shastri. Um, ever since the Green Revolution, the yeah, the farmers, ever since that Green Revolution, the farmers have the safety, the safety net of government guaranteed minimum support price, called as MSP, that they would get if they sell their harvest at a state-run APMC markets operated by Agricultural Produce Market Committee, um, the government body, to ensure that the farmers are safeguarded from exploitation by large retailers. Um, and what do the state governments get in return? They get to collect the market fees, cess or levy for the sale at APMC markets. Um, so, these new farm laws actually allowed the farmers to sell their crops in an open market. But the farmers felt the sense of insecurity uh, because the new laws did not include the provisions of MSP, the minimum support price. They feared that market friendly laws would eventually eliminate regulatory support and leave them at the mercy of greedy corporations that would squeeze them for profits, as they have the good track record of it, through something called as contract farming that was officially introduced in the new farm laws. The central government did not agree to make provisions for MSP in the new laws, which led to rise in mistrust amongst those farmers. Uh, and it's basically between the farmers unions and the government. And after multiple rounds of failed negotiation, the farmers decided to take their agitation to the streets with demand to repeal the new laws altogether. Repealing the laws altogether is not a small thing to do, but they had no choice but to ask for it. Um, and guess what? State governments would also have the stake on it. So 6 state governments refused to implement new farm laws, and they supported the farmers demanding the repeal. What would farmers union do, right? They are up against the government. So what they did is the farmer unions, they mobilized their resources to showcase their power and resolve to the central government. And um, what did government do? When the farmer union decided to, you know, take on with the central government, they decided to march towards the national capital of Delhi under Delhi Chalo campaign. And 50,000 farmers, they started towards Delhi, the borders of Delhi. And what did government do to exercise their power? Is that those 50,000 farmers were prohibited from entering Delhi with the help of police force deployed by the central government. So you see, both sides are exerting power and using their resources to achieve the goal. The farmers decided to camp, so they didn't have a choice. They were not able to enter Delhi and get permission to, you know, show their discontent. So the farmers decided to camp at the borders of Delhi, which became the epicenter of this unprecedented revolution that gradually gained support from masses. They really needed to share their narrative in some way or the other, and the relevant narratives from influential union leaders and farmers were captured by the digital and print media, which further gathered support from the masses. Um, as uh, some of the media is a leverage. So the corporate controlled and pro incumbent media uh, uh, vilified the farmers and their union leaders, attacking their integrity by calling them thugs and anti-nationals, obstructing India's development. And it was an attempt to hijack the revolution, but the farmers did not flinch. They knew that they represent their entire class, for whom this battle was, existential. Um, the independent journalist, however, and the media, they relentlessly amplified the voices and concerns of the farmers over the new farm laws. So there were two factions of media altogether. Um, yeah,
So did you say there were two? There were two factions of media.
altogether, yeah. The government controlled and the corporations, they tried to vilify the farmer, and those who were independent and even anti-incumbent, they started to, amplify the voices of these revolutionaries.
And actually,
Um,
I've got a
mhm,
question for that, which is worth
mhm,
asking now. Is it
mhm.
worth, this pair in booth, is it worth splitting media into local and national, or even by how they're controlled and funded, corporate sponsor ad-based versus locally funded? Were there, I suppose, differences even at that level?
Yeah, it is worth splitting that because we must know what we are consuming.
Yeah.
And I was in Kat's session before this one, where they were mapping radicalization online. And, if we think about the media and how they are influencing us, I think it is important to make that discretion and distinction so that you don't get bought into the stories that uh, any media house would want you to believe. Otherwise you won't see the, farmers union objectively. um does that answer your question, Damien?
Oh, yes, it
In
does. Yeah.
yeah, so,
There's a good question from the
okay,
chat. It
okay,
does.
yeah, sure. I see that on the chat now. um so, you know first of all, um there were two things to gain the power. One, the farmers, alleged that the government has allied with big corporations to shun their responsibilities. But at the same time, farmer farmers increased their own power and gathered necessary resources by uniting 500 farmer unions across the country. And as days passed by, the revolution started gaining traction and support from across the world. So it became international already. So the common goal was to repeal the new law, right? And that common goal, backed by the values and beliefs, held all the unions together. While central government believed that open markets would automatically solve the plight of the farmers, right? But that there you see the conflict between the values and beliefs of the incumbent and the people. And while government tried to sell their story about how beneficial the farmer and the new laws are to the farmers, but the farmers had their apprehensions. And those apprehensions forced them to stay devoted to their cause. And they used the symbols such as, farmer flags, the union flags, the black flags, to stay motivated. Okay, to stay motivated and keep their spirits high. I think those symbols are very important, even if it is an organization or even if it is a company. I think they have their own kind of symbolisms that provide that kind of positive spirit to them to keep on going in trying times. So they also use slogans such as "No farmers, no food," and also had their own anthem. Can you believe it? They had their own anthem called Kisan Anthem, like Farmer Anthem, which became very popular in the digital media. Um, so, those symbols, slogans, the songs, and the support from allies, that reinforced their value, I mean, their beliefs of the farmers that they can force the central government to repeal all three farm laws unconditionally. So in January 2021, the Supreme Court of India um, suspended the farm laws and formed a committee to look into the grievances of protesting farmers. In November 2021, the central government repealed the new farm laws through a constitutional process as well. Um, and the protesting farmers, they returned back home in jubilation. A year of struggle. It started in November 2020. So a year of struggle in extreme weather conditions, actually. And it allegedly took 700 to 750 lives of protesters. India paid homage to them, and their sacrifices actually resurrected the dignity and identity of the farmers once again. So I see it as a historical event and as a testament of importance of dissent in a democracy. And while David was talking about challenge process, right, I was thinking about this and saying that, this the psychological safety would be tested when employees would be open to dissent, saying no without having a fear of repercussion. So you know, eh, Indian government repealed the law, which is good because if they could not convince the weakest section of the society or even the smallest farmer that has the smallest land across the country that this farm law is good for you, then it is fair to repeal the law. Thanks for listening.
Wow, thank you so much. Tope, David, we have just a few minutes. Just wanted your top of mind thoughts, any questions to Manish on that? I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. It's a brilliant map. It tells stories so well, like, and I love the way it's laid out. I think it's really interesting. You put media over to the right and values and beliefs over to the left. So I think that's really important. I was thinking it's amazing to see the almost the reduction of importance of the media, and how values and beliefs are so strong. So I think that's really cool. Brilliant map. Well done.
Thanks.
Yeah, same sentiment as David. I thought this is a very, very complex challenge. And actually what I love about mapping is that even with complexity, you can really, it still applies. Actually, it brings clarity to complexity and all of a sudden it just makes sense. So awesome.
It's up to flags, anthems, slogans. And one of the ones you mentioned sort of equated the traditional role of a soldier, and also mentioned the farmer. So I was just wondering about the importance of, I suppose, the traditional identity and role of farmers. And also, what did the general public think, especially with the kind of mutual disinformation or mutual information from the press?
Yeah, I mean, they were also radicalized, right? the people who follow certain media houses would believe in that story without even reading the farm laws, right? And one of the things that any citizen should start doing is to, objectively see things rather than, believing in the stories. And therefore the maps are right. All three of us have, like Dave and Tope and me, we have shared a story, but the basis of it was a map. And so it's important to go back to the map and say, are we being objective here rather than hearsay?
Brilliant. So we are being kicked out of the room, and that was really jam-packed. I learned loads. I've got so many questions we didn't get to ask, and I'm sure I'll be sort of spamming you with with questions on the same. In all of these talks, what was really interesting to me was there is a systemic change that happens afterwards. So all of the actors in a particular area will know that, hey, something has changed here, and that will affect what they do the next time. That's, for me, is the real revolution. We'll finish up with that. Thank you so much for our speakers today.
Awesome. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful
now.
day.
Thanks,
Thank
folks.
you. Bye.